Israel, in my benchmarking of some 200 countries, first in R&D investment per capita, fourth in the number of researchers per capita, fifth in technology generation, second in high-tech venture capital. But as I learned through that school of hard knocks in Pittsburgh, being a technology leader is a necessary, but importantly, insufficient condition to sustain economic advantage. Think about Pittsburgh. Carnegie Mellon University, world leader in software. University of Pittsburgh, world leader in tissue engineering. Westinghouse Corporation, one of the scientific giants of its time. George Westinghouse, inventing electric power along with Tesla. U.S. Steel, Pittsburgh Plate Glass. I could go on and on and on. Rockwell International Aerospace. Company after company, researcher after researcher. But in our maps, the technology flowed away, and eventually the companies shuttered. Which leads me to the second T, talent. Talent is the critical second T that you must equally focus on. Talent, the number of people who are highly educated with advanced degrees or bachelor's degree, the conventional measure of so-called human capital, not physical capital, human capital, the real driver of economic growth. And my own category of the creative class. You see, when economists count human capital, the conventional economists, the ones we look to, that measure of human capital, which is calculated on the percentage of individuals with a college degree or greater, leaves out some critical people. Steve Jobs doesn't make the cut. Bill Gates doesn't make the cut. Michael Dell doesn't make the cut. And I can go on and on. Mark Zuckerberg doesn't make the cut. Any entrepreneur that dropped out of college to create a world-changing industry doesn't fit that definition. That's why I invented my definition of the creative class. It doesn't matter what your degree is. It matters the kind of work you do. If you work in a creative industry, if you work in a creative occupation. Now, let me tell you this. And Israel, as I mentioned, 13th in the world in the creative class, 40%. Now I want to take you for a deep dive. In our research, we have isolated the occupations and job categories within this creative class that add to economic value, that raise your economic output, that raise your standard of living, that raise your incomes and wages. The first two pieces of this puzzle are obvious. The greater the concentration, not of scientific and engineering degrees, of working scientists and engineers. The greater the concentration of working scientists and engineers, the higher your wages go, the higher your incomes go. The second one is also easy. The greater the concentration of business and management talent, not degrees, not MBAs, and I say that as someone who teaches in a business school, the greater the number of people engaged in business and management, the higher wages and incomes and living standards go. And I will submit to you that the two go together. That it is not enough just to have highly talented scientists and engineers. Those scientists and engineers have to be paired with a cohort of entrepreneurial managers. In fact, the scientific and engineering skills are much more widely shared. It is the ability to not only see that technology asset, that Steve Jobs skill, but to mobilize and harness and execute that combination of science and technology and management that leads to real economic growth. But you know that. But the third one is the one my peers sneer at, look down their noses at. But we have the data. We have the evidence. My peers will tell you that investing in arts and culture, that investing in cultural heritage, that investing in music and artistic institutions, that's what rich regions do. It's the effect, not the cause. When you're an affluent region like Pittsburgh in the 19th century or Detroit in the early 20th century or New York or London, you buy up antiquities, then you create great museums. But you know, when I served on the board of the Warhol Museum, my museum director told me something that none of us should ever forget. He said, great art was never made in a museum. You see, arts, culture, entertainment, and heritage are economic generators equal to, if not greater than, science and technology and business management. That's not just an opinion. That is the results of our detailed empirical research. And when the community hits on all of those cylinders, when there is science and technology, when there is business and management, and when there is arts and culture, that's when the creative economy starts to cycle. Now, in my work, I use funny examples. I point out that before Silicon Valley was the center of the high-tech universe, what was the San Francisco Bay Area known for? It was a place for hippies, for bohemians, for artists, for musicians. It was an open culture that was meritocratic, where if you were an excellent musician or an excellent artist or an excellent startup engineer, you could have a go. What was Seattle like before Microsoft? It was a center for new music. What was New York like? New York now becoming the center, beginning to compete against San Francisco and Silicon Valley as a center for startups. It was a center for open-minded, idea-based creative thinking in the Greenwich Village in downtown Manhattan. Creativity requires an open mind. This is something you know well in this country. These are your investments in universities. It requires an open mind, which leads me to my third T, tolerance. Technology, talent, and tolerance. The mayor and I talked at great length about this, and we hope to do more work together on just this. A city, a community, a place where everyone's talent is valued. Man and woman, boy and girl, straight and gay. And the point that I make in my research, when you look at that Silicon Valley or whatever high-tech area you do is the one you want to emulate in that cluster, remember this fact. More than 50% of the founders of the startup companies in San Francisco and Silicon Valley are not American by birth. They were born in another country. So openness, tolerance, diversity, talent, and technology form the three T's, and where they go together, none alone, each is a necessary, none alone is a sufficient condition. And by way of example, I mentioned Pittsburgh having the technology. My wife and I spend the winters in Miami and Miami Beach. Miami Beach is fun and the sun and diversity and tolerance, but it lacks the technology. When all three come together in a community, that's when the economic cycle begins. Which brings me to the fourth T. I didn't write this in my first book, but I learned this from visiting communities all over the world. This T is clunky. It's not as elegant as technology, talent, and tolerance. We call it territorial assets. We could equally call it your ability to generate sustainable, real creative tourism. It's the fundament. It's the fourth T that unifies the others, that completes the square. By territorial assets, we mean what is truly unique and real and authentic. What is the essence of a place? And I give it a definition that I call not the quality of life, but the quality of place. And I hope you understand that difference. Not quality of life, which many focus on, but quality of place. I know you live it here in Jerusalem. I know you see it throughout the country, but I want to focus on it. The quality of place. And I say there are three dimensions. First dimension of quality of place is what's there, the history, the reality, the sites, the cultural sites, the historic sites, in this case the archaeological sites, the tremendous richness of history. Those are an important condition. But it's not just what's there, it's who's there. The ability of people, local and tourist, to use those sites, to use the quality that's there, the realness that's there, the what's there, the who's there, and the third one, the what's going on. The ability to animate the place, to induce in the place an excitement. And as we were talking yesterday and talking about Jerusalem, we were discussing what this does. When these assets come together around quality of place, what do they do? How do they add to economic value? Well, they add to economic value directly by supporting tourism and generating industry and bringing money in, and in your case, quite a lot of money. But they also have a critical indirect effect that cannot be discounted. And one of my students, an Italian woman named Irene Tignale, documented this in her thesis. This territorial effect, this touristic effect, this quality of place effect, not only has a direct effect on your economy, its more important effect is indirect. It signals to the outside world that yours is a place of excitement, of energy, and most importantly, of opportunity. As people scan this spiky world, as young people and middle-aged people look around the world for places they can locate, and think about scientists, artists, and by extension, the creative class, how in Israel you compete for great scientists, how across the world we compete for great ballet dancers and musicians and artists. The competition for these people is truly global and multinational. Well, as people scan the environment for the places that they want, particularly young people who have the world at their feet, the talented ones, the ones who drive economic growth, they are looking for signals that a place is open to them. They're not simply looking at companies because they know, my dad worked for the same company for more than 50 years, from age 13 to age 65. They know that their average span in a job will be less than 3 years. For a young person in the age 20s, the average span in a job is a year. We may like that, we may not like that. But they know that they're going to have to look at a career path as a series of jobs and experiences. They want to go to a country, to a community that is filled with opportunity for them, their significant others, and their families. And a place that is a source of excitement, that has territorial assets, that is a place of energy and quality of place, it not only adds directly to the economy, it sends that critical signal. And we've gone deeper still. Working closely with the Gallup organization, we have now surveyed hundreds of thousands of individuals. We've surveyed hundreds of thousands of individuals across two dimensions. The first one is what makes them happy with their lives, and the second one is what are the things they look for in making a decision about what community to live and work in and to attach their families. Well, on what makes people happy? What we found is that most economists and psychologists look at two factors. In fact, most moms and dads advise their kids along these two dimensions. The first dimension is quite evident to anyone who studies economics or understands the modern economy. The first factor is the kind of work we do. Key to being happy in life is not just making money, but doing work that is meaningful and purposeful. Work that really fills our souls with meaning and joy. I remember my parents telling me that I had to go to college. My dad worked in a factory, so I didn't have to. They wanted me to be a professional, to have a degree, so I could do work that added income, but also was meaningful, that wasn't degrading or perhaps dehumanizing. We advise our children very diligently along that front. Well, the second one my mom told me about. While my dad urged me to get an education so I didn't have to go to the factory, my mom said the key to life, she said, was, Richard, I found your father.